Howdy, and welcome to the White Hat Law Show with Warren Nord, where we cover a mix of current events, politics, and the law. Take it away, Warren.
Welcome to White Hat Law. I'm Warren Nord, your host. I've been joined by Konnie Burton and Kelly Hancock, our local senators. And today's kind of a special day. We're live, so I have no idea what's going to happen. And I don't know how this is going to go, but we're going to do our best and see what happens. Today we're talking about the Texas economy and budget. And so, and one senator isn't enough to explain this to me, so we have two.
It's a big budget.
It's a big budget,
yes.
So,
Yes, it is.
So Kelly, if I were a sixth grader and you wanted to explain to me in 5 minutes before you lose my attention, tell me about the Texas budget.
Texas budget is a big budget. We're actually the 10th largest economy in the world. I mean, we're bigger than Russia. Everybody wants to talk about Russia now.
Right.
Bigger than Russia.
So we're big. I mean, and over roughly $220 billion, and that's a billion with a B, economy. And really, if you want to break it up, there are different pieces of the pie. We have what we call articles, and all that is pie slices. Since you're what grade are you?
I'm in sixth grade.
Sixth grade, okay.
Which pie would you like to be?
I'm going to stick with pie. So we've got 12 different slices of pie, and it's very interesting. What you want to be either that health and human services slice of the pie, or you want to be the education slice of the pie, because if you're those, you're going to have enough to not only have dessert, but you're going to have enough to take home and feed with your family. And those two pieces of between education and health and human services equates to roughly 80% of our budget. And in that, the vast majority of it is either dictated by federal law or by judicial direction, school spending, education spending. We are directed by judges that we've got to be equitable and we've got to be adequate. Now, judges have recently stated that is, while you have to meet those standards, it is up to the legislative body to determine how those standards are met. And so in Health and Human Services, Konnie will tell you, Medicaid is a huge portion of that, but that's 80% of our spend.
Right.
So we're a more than $200 billion budget, or economy. And
well, that's our appropriations. I mean, that is what we spend that's what
our spending.
That's what our spending is.
Okay.
And so Health and Human Services, I'd just like to add just what Senator Hancock Kelly was saying. Health and Human Services is the number 2 driver in our state budget. And 78% of that is Medicaid spending. So transportation is number 3 in the budget. And so what I like to tell everybody in explaining all this is that if we don't get a handle on Medicaid spending, not much else is going to matter in the long run. It's that escalating out of control. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not trying to. I always say that's kind of depressing news.
We're pretty limited.
Right, exactly.
Pretty limited.
Right,
in what we
so
do
some of the
because
things we're trying to do, I know Senator Schwartner, who's the chair of Health and Human Services, has been to D.C. We're trying to get to where we can block grant this so we can kind of create our own Medicaid system here in Texas, but whether they will, let the regulations not be in place, I mean, that's a huge problem. So anyway, these are issues that we have to deal with down there.
So you all do actually send. I mean, people. I've always been concerned about this. We have people that say, well, it's all Washington, and then but all the work that they do is they go to Washington and ask for more money and more regulations. Yeah. And the same thing happens in local. You see our local city council will say, well, it's those state guys who make us spend this money, but they send lobbyists to go have you guys pass laws to make them spend more money.
Right.
Well, and the reality is, a lot of the state mandates, as you call, were lobbied for by local governments.
Right.
I remember, I spent 13 years on the school board. Well, one of the things, and I kept hearing about mandates on the local government. So I actually filed legislation to set up a pilot program that any district that laid out a long-term strategic plan that was approved by the state, that they would be exempt from all state mandates. And I finally got the chair of education to give me a hearing on that. And it turns out that there was a long line of people wanting to testify against that. And it was most of your education groups were lining up to testify against a bill to not just reduce, completely limit all local mandates to a local school district. So, I mean, what you realize when you start looking at these mandates is a vast majority of them were placed in there for one reason or another, and lobbied for at the local level.
Well, how do you? I mean, for example, I'm involved with the charter school, right? And I found out last night that we're obligated to, at least in theory, offer every single course, and that every high school in Texas is required to offer every single course, which of course is very expensive, and unless the TEA says, well, it'd be a detriment to your district, which means never happens, right? And so there's lots of things we could talk about that, but let's try to keep a big picture just yet.
I was thinking, I could be wrong, but I was thinking right where Kelly was talking would be a good place to talk about, because I think right now we have a real confusion in our country as far as what each level of government's role is. I'm for, and I know Kelly is too, limited government at all levels. And the fact of the matter is, the states were here first. The states were created first.
Right.
The states created the federal government, and we created the municipalities, counties.
It's always funny that we have different kinds of cities, right? Each city has different kinds of powers.
Which the state has given them, right? So the state is the supreme governing body.
Right.
Because people always tell me, you're being hypocritical because you're mad at the federal government for telling the state what to do. It's like, no, that's the way the state formed a federal government. We're really supposed to be kind of working in concert with each other.
Right.
But the state also formed the local municipalities and counties, and so we can tell the federal government, stop telling us what to do, and we in turn can tell the local municipalities and counties what to do. So we're not being hypocritical.
Right.
So I just kind of want to lay that out because I think so many people have forgotten that, and everybody thinks that their level of government is, they can do whatever they want whenever they want, and that's just not the case.
Well, we see this all the time, right? We people will say, and there are people I know that are involved in city politics, and if you're talking about issues that are far away from us, in D.C. or in overseas, man, we are in lockstep. We believe everything the same way. But when you come to something local, say, oh no, I can plan your life better than you can,
right?
Because I'm in charge. And it's in D.C. somebody else is in charge, and I'm not in charge, so it's different. But when I'm in charge, this socialistic program, this collectivist approach to I'm in charge of your life, that works just fine. I can spend your money and invest it for you in this city so that your life is better, without having to go through the vagaries of putting it in a bank, somebody borrowing money.
Right.
I'm just going to give it to them.
Right. It's not, local control isn't about local government control. It's not supposed to be. It's about the people, right? So it's about the control of the people. So in a lot of what we do, in some of the, like for instance, our property tax legislation, reform legislation that we tried to pass last session, we gave, go ahead,
Senate
Kelly.
passed it, and I think we both agree, I think all three would agree that we're for restraining government at all levels.
Right.
The reality is, and you talked about it, it's spending someone else's money. So the reality is, without some type of governor on the system, and I'm not talking the governor,
Yeah.
I'm talking about some that holds back government, and especially government spending.
Right.
Then government will continue to grow and spend faster than, frankly, it needs to.
That's right.
What's the overall
Maybe then if people want it to, right? Certain people will want it to grow. But you've got to put those restraints on it, and we have, in the Senate, passed the Senate Bill 9. Last time, we've passed it 2 sessions now.
That's right.
That actually puts a governor on state growth, on
summarize
ours.
that for people.
I mean, we're doing ourselves.
That's right.
And really all that does, Warren, is that says that government really shouldn't grow past population and inflation.
Right.
And, we talk about it. We want our businesses here to be effective. We want them to grow. Frankly, we want them to grow at a faster rate than inflation, right?
Right.
The current system that we have in place in the state of Texas, and the reason that we voted to change it to inflation, is based on economic growth. Well, and what that means is because Warren NORAD runs a more efficient or a better business, that what we're saying as government is, I deserve my piece of that efficiency and effectiveness that you've created within your own business, if we base it on economic numbers. Inflation numbers mean if the inflation grows at 3%, but your business grows at 10%, I don't get to take, as government, an extra 10% of your business. I should only take enough to cover the services that we're doing now, which forces government to do what business has to do in downturns, is prioritize. And so, when we talk about property taxes, we're looking, I want those restraints at all levels. Because I know if you don't have them, that, it may not be, not be a 10% growth in your business, right?
Right.
It could be, with property taxes, it's a 10% growth in the value of your property. But that doesn't mean that Warren Nord has a 10% increase in his cash flow.
Right.
That's right.
It just means, his equity, his property is worth 10% more. Why does government get to take that?
Right.
It seems as though there's an assumption, with the property taxes, we have this at JPS, right? That property income taxes are going higher, and so we just assume that this is just free money. We're just going to add this to the budget. It's not as though we look at this extra $50 million and say that we should automatically just assume it's ours to spend on whatever we think is important. But the problem I have with this, people will sometimes say to me, well, what you're saying is that the people in Austin should be able to tell people in Arlington how much money to spend on education, as though it's the job of Austin to do that. And I respond back, well, what if the people of Arlington have a bunch of bureaucrats that want to make it outrageously high? Should the state not care?
Right. Right.
Of course, those people generally don't care.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to go back, a few years ago, the state bought down property taxes by 50 cents. Now, most people across the state, the average, they saw 22 cents of that because values increased and, frankly, tax rates increased.
Better than nothing.
And so, but it was something, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, it only took 1 year before that decrease in property taxes went away. And so, really all we're talking about is putting, restraints on the growth of government that local individuals could vote for if they wanted to bust that cap. Right. Now, there's a lot of misconception that, well, this is a new thought, this is a new theory, it's just you new hardcore conservatives that are doing this. Wrong. The reality is that this was put in place back when Democrats controlled government in Texas, back when they put it in place, and it was actually at a 5% rollback rate that got changed to the higher level during hyperinflation. Remember the Carter years,
sure.
right?
Right.
And so, yes, government put this in place, not Republicans.
Right.
It was put in place previously by the state for local government to rein in, and good for them. Look, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. If you're conservative and want to rein in government spending, I'm all for it.
Right.
It was at a lower level. Government saw inflation, Carter years, double-digit inflation. This isn't fair to the cities. The state loosened that up to a higher level, higher rollback rate, and it's stayed there ever since.
I never have, but it's not as though the city or the school district is prevented from raising taxes. They just have to face the music with the voters.
And
very rarely say no.
But Warren, schools are completely different, which why we're bringing into this debate is the reason they're not in this the reason they're not included, wasn't included in the legislation that the Senate passed, was there is a cap.
And that's
so
right. They already have it.
There is a cap on what they can spend. And there's a way to go to the voters and bust that cap.
Right.
And so between what they have maintenance and operation budget and their interest in sinking basically their mortgage on their buildings.
Right.
On doing that. So there is on education spending, and what happens there is it's just a big bucket. And so whatever level that local monies come in, the state pours in money on top of it. And so what we've seen, because their rate hasn't changed, but property values have increased at a higher rate than inflation, local taxes have filled more of that bucket, and the state's portion goes on top. And so there is a governor on education spending to a certain point. Now, we did put another $5.2 billion on top, additional spend at the state level. But cities, counties, special districts far outpace on their rate of growth of revenue, far outpace school district because of that governor that's already on school districts.
Well, it's a common phrase, a common claim that I'm reading from a lot of people who know just enough because they get their memo from...
They know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, right. They know enough to ask hard questions.
Which is the education fund.
Right. And they'll say, well, the state's decreasing its funding, and therefore they're the problems. We saw this with a recent kerfuffle at a public gathering where you have a person who should know better trying to say that the state is not doing its job. You want to explain why that's wrong?
Well, what I'll start explaining is education funding is a broken system.
Right.
I mean, I don't think anybody here is
That's
going to
right.
disagree that the
That's
education system's not a broken system. Robin Hood, broken.
That's right.
Right.
It seems unfair. It is truly Robin Hood, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Here's where we are. The courts have said you will address your equity issues. In other words, you've got to have some equitable educational opportunities for those in certain parts of the state that don't have the economic prosperity that we have in North Texas, and someone's got to pay for it. And so there's an equity portion. Education partially fund property taxes. Well, we've seen significant growth, fast rate of growth in appraisals. Well, when the rates stay the same, the local funding is accelerated beyond really the budgets that we've passed in the state are population and inflation. Those are the budgets we passed. That's the level of growth. We don't think government should outgrow someone's ability to pay for it. So educational spending has grown, it has increased, but not at the rate that local property taxes have, and therefore more of that bucket gets filled with local monies. Yes, if that local revenues were reduced, the state's portion would significantly rise. The perfect example is when we bought down 50 cents, go back and look and see how much more the state put in that year, because just exactly what I'm saying. And those that want to argue with me want to ignore the facts of the past, because when those numbers dropped at the local level, guess who paid for that to make sure we met the demands of student enrollment growth and inflation growth that year? Well, state government did.
Right.
And it would do the same thing. As local property taxes, if they would lower, state funds would come in and fill that bucket on top. Now, here's what it doesn't do. It doesn't maximize revenue. And that's the problem we have, Warren, is that too much of local government is being in education. It's being about how do we maximize revenue, rather than how do we run government effective and efficiently. And
how
look,
can you have a good? You can't have a good public education without a $60 million in a stadium. I mean, you have to have that.
And look, local voters, I think they voted on it. If they're willing to pay for it, they get what. Now, should 2% of the people that voted affect 100%? I think the numbers that show up and vote is a problem. Mm-hmm. But look, if they don't vote, that's their problem. So that local part. But the reality is property value growth is going to keep going up. And it's going to outpace inflation in Texas because we're growing so fast. And we've got to really, all we got to look at is going back to the previous days before we raised that rollback rate, right?
That's right.
To hyperinflation levels, into a realistic level of where it should be for proper growth. And then, it takes prioritization. But you've got to decide, is my job as the local elected officials to maximize revenues, or to run government in a cost-efficient and effective way?
Well, I think Oprah had a school that she said, "No, I'm going to do it right," and she spent gajillions of dollars. I think it was like $20,000 per person, and it just totally failed.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. And so this idea that people will point. Conservatives will say money's not everything, and then liberals will say, well, money is something, and it's pretty important. So we can all agree that there's a certain amount of money you need to do the job.
Sure.
But there's no limit to the amount of money you can waste in trying to educate a group of people.
Well, unless it's your own.
What's that?
There's no, as long as it's somebody else's.
That's right.
Right.
It's easier to waste somebody else's money
That's
than it is
right.
to waste your own money.
Exactly.
For some reason.
And that's why you've got to have some limits on it.
That's right.
You've got to have some restraint. And we wanted to put in self-restraints at the state level that are actually tighter than what we currently have. But it doesn't do anything good if we limit the growth of government at the state level, but yet we continue to operate with numbers that go back to hyperinflation years.
Right.
And that just seems very common sense to me.
Well, Connie, you had your own kerfuffle not too long ago. Maybe the same kerfuffle. Anyway, I just like the word. I'm sorry. You took flack for being opposed to cronyism generally.
Right.
What is it that you want to do? Do you want to send us all to the Stone Age and make people pay for the stuff they get? And,
Right.
Don't we want to keep trying to get money from the valley to fund my swimming pool? What is it you want to do?
I just want us to get back to what we do believe in, and that is low regulations, low taxes for everyone. Right? We've kind of morphed at different levels of government to saying you're deserving of a bigger tax break. You're deserving of this. And in my mind, this is where we cause all the problems, right? And why we're all kind of in angst with each other, because we're all looking at the other and saying, but he's getting a big tax break,
Right.
It's kind of like people that supposedly when they fly on a plane, people get mad because the person next to them only paid a couple of $100, but you paid $1,300 for the
Right.
seat on the plane, right? And people get mad about that. And so if we could just keep government at a level for everybody,
Right.
then everybody would be happy. What always angered me through the Obama years was that's what he always said. We need to even the playing field, which is great, right? We all, yes, let's even the playing field.
Who doesn't want to even the playing field?
But how he would do that, the policies then that he would espouse to do that would be to give this group, whatever interest group, a better deal, right? And that was leveling the playing field. I truly want it to be level so that nobody, can say, well, they're getting a better deal and I have to pay these taxes and they're coming in and not paying their fair share, which So that's what I want. I want us to live under the principles that we believe in. Again, that's low taxes, low regulations across the board so that, the private sector can do what the private sector does best.
Right.
Let government fund education, transportation, public safety, water infrastructure. Let's fund those things and let the private sector take care of the private sector, and we could all go back to kumbaya again is what I believe.
And we're seeing the federal government do, they're kind of looking at that. When the president talks about re-looking at free trade deals. I was with a large manufacturer here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that makes, cosmetics. And we took him to lunch and he was complaining to me that the regulatory environment, the cost it takes him to sell his product into China and other places in the world is so high. Yet when China wants to sell the same products into the U.S., it just freely flows in here, whether it meets standards or anything else. It doesn't. And so, part of that leveling the playing field and the thing that we have to recognize as a state is we compete with other states.
Sure.
Just like, and his question to me was, I don't, because he was a conservative business owner and said, look, I'm not asking for more regulations. I'm just saying, help me. I'm trying to compete here, but the field's not the same. And that's when you talk about some of these incentives. What's happened is
it hurts the guy that didn't get it.
And name me a state that's not doing it. And we've got this you've kind of got this situation of, we have a $1.7 trillion economy. $1.7 trillion. And we've got to compete economically. And unfortunately, and so what it is, we've got to take a hard, conservative look at it, but also recognize we're in a competitive environment.
Well, there's a great book, Entrepreneurs versus the State, put out by some really great people, and it recounts a number of the stories of people that were going against countries and competing with countries, and who were giving benefits to various people, and they do it routinely because countries aren't very good at this, right? And so you can actually have entrepreneurs that would take on, and these are some of the old oil barons and such. I'm not sure I buy into the idea that because other countries are taxing and using high tariffs to hurt their people, that we should do the same thing to us. I think
and that's what this guy was saying. Let's not do that, but we can certainly, but we don't have to have an OSHA that's out of control.
Right.
We don't have to say, I'm sorry, you got to meet these incredibly crazy EPA. Every charter school.
Well, and we can put pressure on them. You can put pressure on them to reduce their part. Rather than growing our part of government, hey, China, you like to do business in Texas.
I'm perfectly okay with putting pressure on China to relax their rules. I would hate to think that because other people are going to use high tariffs to benefit a few people and their economy to the detriment of all their people, that we would do the same thing just to show that we're silly.
But putting pressure on other countries that want to do business with us.
There's
other ways to apply pressure than high regulations.
Right.
The thing that we kind of alluded to it, but this idea of the 313s and all of those is, we kind of say, okay, we're going to give a tax abatement to this organization, and we pretend that nobody's filling that in, that missing tax revenue. Here in Arlington, one of not here, but my city of Arlington, we have the Rangers, and it's $25 million of property tax revenue that is not seen by the city and the school district. $25 million a year. And the people who are in favor of this deal are also people that are saying that the state isn't giving us enough money, while they're over here damaging and making it worse.
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing, the way 313 works for school districts. So if a school district says we're going to give 313, which is a property tax abatement, it can be for a certain years, depends on how it's drawn up. But again, that's where I was talking about, that certain people don't want to believe me, but I can show them the numbers. When you give away that potential revenue, the state comes in and backfills that. So while it may not cost the local district much at all, because it may cost them a little, because the local revenues are going to be slightly higher than what the state's going to backfill.
Right.
The state fills in that void. So that's just the reality. So there's even though it's a local decision,
that's right,
there's a cost to the state every time 313 is applied.
When I talk to AISD school board members about this, they'll say, we are not losing anything by exempting the Rangers, because that money wasn't going to wind up coming to us anyway because of Robin Hood. The actual real world dollar difference is this much. And so then the second question of, okay, so what you're saying is you're depriving the system of that $25 million a year. That doesn't bother you. You're all in favor of education, and you want to be fair and everything else, but we don't care about the rest of the state. We don't care about education generally. We just care about our little world.
And it goes back to why we have to fix the finance system, which is what we are doing right now.
We start off. It is a broken system.
Right.
And we've put together a commission. There were some arguments on whether we need it or not. The Senate firmly believed that we really need to scrap it. Warren, we have golden pennies. We have acetar. We had hold harmless. There's about 7 Band-Aids on top of the current school funding formula that have been mandated, or lobbied for or something. And so, it is like never cleaning a wound out, and you just keep throwing a Band-Aid on it, eventually that wound's not going to heal. Right. And so this broken system, until we rip all the Band-Aids off and we really tear it down and break down and look at it, we're not going to fix school finance.
No.
maybe we're waiting for it to be just as complex and inefficient as our medical system.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
get them all on the same level.
Exactly,
Messed up.
exactly. And it's why there's so much, why people can kind of pick something out and argue something and sound relatively like they're making a good argument, but you have to look at the whole picture of it. And so there's a lot of confusion, of course, because it's just so many things. Like Senator Nelson said, there's maybe 10 people who totally understand.
Well, in any given school district, I mean, we have big school districts
That's
here. Right. But if you bring them in, I think pretty much they'll tell you, yeah, we've got 2 or 3 maybe that understand it.
That's right.
And that's about it. That's wrong.
That's wrong.
I mean, how do you hold somebody accountable for something you don't understand?
Right.
That's right.
And so, the average citizen ought to be able to understand one of the primary functions of the state, which is education. We get that.
Right.
I mean, it is. I spent 13 years doing it at $600 less than I get paid as an elected state official.
So
You're making the big bucks now, Kelly.
You are
I got a
in
raise.
charge.
I got a
Yeah,
raise.
there you go.
And so it is important, but the average person should be able to understand it, and we need a system that does that, and which means you got to break it down, tear it up, throw a hand grenade on it.
And Senator Nelson, who is the finance chair, and Senator Taylor, who is the education chair, have both said all during session the goal is to make it a simpler system. Now, whether we can do that or not, but that's exactly right. I mean, we need to make it simple. So we are trying to fix that. And then the state is also, as you mentioned, we're trying to fix this out of control local property taxes. We get, that's the highest complaint my office gets. That is it. The property taxes are out of control. And we desperately tried last session to fix that, to put some reforms in place so that the people could vote.
Right.
And that's what local control really is people, not, again, government.
Which is kind of funny.
Not the low-level bureaucrats who think that they can run our lives so much more
Well, it's kind of
effectively.
funny to think that a bunch of Republicans were actually trying to go back to the system and the levels that the Democrats put in place, and we couldn't do it because of pushback.
Yeah.
Right. So that's going to be our number one issue next
property
session
tax
as
will
well.
be number one.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely number one. I think Governor Abbott's already come out, did a press conference. We were both there with him. He's committed to it. The lieutenant governor's committed to it. We're committed to it. We passed it. The Senate passed it last session. We're going to.
Maybe I should have some people in the House here to help me understand.
And
why
as you
that's
know,
not
we'll have
happening.
new leadership
We'll
in the
get there.
House.
We'll
So
get
I think
there.
we're going to get
Yeah,
there.
I think we'll get there.
I think we're going to get there. And so I'm committed to it. And, I think.
Well, you were invited here to help us all understand this, and I hope that
There
people
may be more
Well,
confusion.
if the viewers at least get the idea that there are at least two sides of the story, it is not as simple as some people want to say.
That's right.
And that there are good reasons for the things that you're doing, then that's all I can ever hope for. So I want to say thank you both for being
Absolutely.
here very
Thank
much.
you for having
and
us on.
Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned next time, probably next Friday, right about this time. Until then, this is White Hat Law and Warren Nord saying good day.
Well, that's a wrap, folks, and we want to thank you for listening to the White Hat Law Show here with Warren Nord. To find out more about Warren, check him out at nordlaw.com. See you next time.